right, we are going live any moment, and I'm going to start the countdown clock. Countdown clock is on, and yeah, we are now live, and so people can see us and hear us, but they know that the program isn't going to start for another several minutes.
Okay, excellent. And will you read out the questions, Jeffrey? Is that how it works?
That's
okay.
That's exactly how it'll work. We have a group of volunteers. I see there are already 4 volunteers fielding questions, and they send the questions to me on a separate Google Doc. So then I select the best of those questions, and I will send them to you. I will read them.
Okay,
to you.
let's hope I have an answer or an explanation.
It's perfectly
or
fine
response.
to say, I don't know.
Well, that's most of these things, as you know, Jeffrey, it's I don't know.
That's fine. I mean, just be yourself and everything will be fine.
Okay.
As I say, some questions are coming in already, and then we'll go for 90 minutes.
Okay.
And then after that, I'll invite the volunteers to spend a little time with us on Zoom.
Okay, excellent. And so we'll be finished by about 3 o'clock.
Let's see,
because it's almost 1 p.m. my time.
Okay, yes, we'll be finished we should be finished before 3 o'clock your time.
Okay, perfect. Because I have to bring my daughter up to her college, which is about an hour away. So that'll be good.
Yeah, and I have an appointment myself afterwards. So
okay, excellent.
Yeah. And so what I'm going to do while we're waiting, we still have 7 minutes. I'm just going to go get a little tea.
Okay, excellent.
And I'll come right back.
All right, Jeffrey. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, look at that. You changed the background.
Is it better? The
I
lighting?
like it. I like it.
Good, good. At least you don't get all those different configurations. And
Mhm.
I have some color to my skin, so that's good.
Yeah.
And then all of our reality is information based, as many have hypothesized, like Edgar Mitchell, for example.
Yes. Okay. So it looks like everything is in order. I can quickly just check.
All of our reality is information based, as many have hypothesized, like Edgar Mitchell, for example.
Yes. You could see there's a delay.
Okay, okay. I heard that.
Yeah. And okay, people are joining, and in fact, in another 3.5 minutes or less, we'll be live. Well, we're live now. We'll start the program. So the people who log on early get to hear us chat while we're waiting for the official beginning.
Well, thank you everyone for listening in.
I expect a very healthy group of people today based on how popular your previous video was, Ray.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, people are very interested in this topic. They're very interested in high strangeness events because I'm sure more people have them than we realize, because lots of people are afraid to talk about them.
Oh my goodness, yeah, we discussed that last time.
Yeah.
I always bring up these topics, Jeffrey, and like, for example, this is 2 days ago. I went out because my daughter wanted to get some breakfast, so we went out. I went out to a store to pick up her waffles, and so there was a young lady there. She was in her early 20s, and we started off, are you going to school? What are you interested in? And she's interested in the health field. And then eventually I came up with the topic of near-death experiences. I said, have you ever heard of near-death experiences? She goes, yep, very, very much. And I said, well, why do you say that? She said, well, my mother had one. And she told me the story of her mother. She had a pretty robust NDE experience. And so I said, have you mentioned that to anyone else? And she said, no one else, except only my mother and I. Yeah. And she said, who are you going to tell these things to?
Probably over 1 million people who have had near-death experiences.
Yeah, no, it's a huge number. I mean, I had my blood taken out a few months ago, and there were 2 phlebotomists there, right? I've had the sensation, Jeffrey, where I know whether someone has had a major contact experience. Okay, the first year after I interacted with that huge UAP, which I call now consciousness aerial phenomenon, I had that. It was like very, very powerful. Okay, but it's diminished over the years. But I still get that.
Let me interrupt you for a minute, Ray, because we're going to be starting the program in less than a minute. And can you tilt your screen a little forward so more of you is in the picture again, or sit? I know when I sit forward, it happens. So yeah, that's
a little bit better.
Well, yeah, I think it may be cutting off your forehead a little. No.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's good.
How about now?
That's very good. That's very good. So we've got about 20 seconds to go.
Okay, and we can continue our discussions as part of our response.
That's right.
But it was one phlebotomist had a NDE, and another one, the other one, her husband had it, and she both of them began to see dead people. They saw ghosts and spirits.
I see. Okay, the program is now starting. I want to welcome everybody. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I'm live with Ray Hernandez. Ray is the founder and director of the Consciousness and Contact Research Organization. He has been an experiencer himself. He's very familiar with events of high strangeness, and he's been motivated throughout. Because of his experiences, it was as if you were receiving directions to go out and do this. And all the people that you needed to work with came to you almost immediately to help you. And since that experience, you've been able to publish. I wish I could hold them. They're heavy to weigh at this point, well over, I think, close to 2,000 pages or so of data from people who are having these experiences, not to mention a survey in which I think, 4,000 people or so responded about their own dramatic experiences. And the main point that you want to make is that these things are all connected, whether it's UFO contacts or near-death experience or reincarnation. They are all ways of touching a mystery that envelops us all, that you have referred to as the mind of God. So welcome, Ray. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Once again, it's an honor to be with you. You have been one of my intellectual gurus, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, we are getting a lot of questions already, Ray, but I wonder if before we get into the many questions that are coming in from our viewers, would you like to make an opening statement at all?
Sure, I'll just a very brief statement. Before March 4th of 2012, I had zero interest in these topics. As you know, Jeffrey, I went to UC Berkeley for my PhD, our joint alma maters there, and so I had an academic background, and my thinking was always as an academic, and I was working for over 20 years as an IRS tax attorney. So the last thing on my mind was to think about these topics, and then I had a remarkable experience on that day, which totally transformed my life, and it continued until now. It continues. And so, like anyone else, you're trying to understand what happened, what's going on, what is the nature of our reality. And so just like anyone else that's had these experiences, you're trying to find answers to a phenomenon that is not easily explained. So.
Well, I know our viewers are going to have many questions. So here is a question that came in. And our volunteers actually translated it from Spanish to English. It was a question that one of our viewers named CCRI, I believe, said, I know you speak Spanish. For 2 months, years ago, we talked on the internet, and I have the book, Beyond UFOs, an 800-page book, a classic jewel that was going to be published in several languages, Mandarin and Spanish. And she says, what happened? I also had the joy of meeting the great astronaut Edgar Mitchell from Apollo 14, who has already passed away. She says, I saw several of your videos with your beautiful wife and daughters. I wish you all well. And she goes on, I met you through my friend Joanne Summerscales, and I am a friend of Sixto Jose Paz Wells.
Well, there's a lot of issues there in that statement. Yeah. And now to address your question,
about the Spanish
translation. The Spanish translation. All of our work is done by volunteers. I am not paid for any of these things. I don't make any money out of all these things. We did have chapter 1 translated into Spanish, and that I could send you. Just send me an email to info, INFO, @ agreater.com, info@agreaterreality.com. Envíame un correo electrónico y yo le envío el capítulo número 1 que ya está traducido a español. Translated means send me an email to info@agreaterreality.com, and I will send you a translation of chapter 1 in Spanish. We have that in various languages. And French is another one, and in Italian. Um, and but in terms of the full book, it's a difficult task to try to translate more than 800 pages. Es muy difícil traducir 800 páginas a otro idioma, pero eso es una de mis objetivos. It's one of my objectives para el futuro, for the future.
Okay, and here we're getting another contact, or I should say a comment on the previous message. This is from Manuel Aleo, who points out that Sixto Paz Wells is a well-known Peruvian contactee.
Yeah, I know Sixto Paz very well. When he comes to Miami, he always stays at the home of my best friend, Alberto Fernandez, and his wife, Rebecca Fernandez. And you mentioned Alberto in our last interview. You personally met him.
Yes,
So, so we do have that connection of our mutual friend, Alberto. Alberto's told me various experiences that he had in Chile, in the desert of Chilca with Sixto. And maybe today I could tell a little bit of some of these stories, but I know Sixto very well, and also Fernando Gonzalez, who also is a very dear friend and knows Alberto very, very well and stays at their home. And these are all individuals that do similar work as Sixto, which is commonly called CE5, but I prefer the English term HICE, Human Initiated Contact Experiences. And so we're all in the same network. And Sixto is a very dear friend and doing excellent work.
Okay, here's a question from a viewer whose internet name is Jive Cat the Magnificent, or his YouTube name, or hers, I'm not sure. And who asks, are you aware of, and this sounds like a book title, The Psychic Sasquatch and Their UFO Connection by Jack Lapseritis? And do you think that Yeti, Bigfoot, and Yowies should be considered another contact modality?
It's, I wouldn't call it a separate contact modality, but I would call it a separate quote unquote physical being that people are seeing. And yes, it is consciousness based. Why? Because I know this individual that you're talking about that wrote that book. I had a lengthy conversation with him. We both spoke at a conference about 1.5 years ago at the Arkansas UFO conference. And he also believes that that all of the paranormal is interrelated, and that Sasquatch is part of this phenomenon. And also, I've spoken with many experiencers that have seen Sasquatch. They've also have seen deceased people. They've had out-of-body experiences. They've seen tons of UFOs. So seeing Sasquatch comes with a lot of other additional paranormal experiences. So that's why it's all interrelated, because many of these experiencers of the contact modalities are having so many of these interrelated experiences, and one of them is Sasquatch. I hope I've answered your question.
Well, what would you let me ask a follow-up question myself, Ray. What do you think the Sasquatch is?
Well, in our survey, the free experiencer, UFO experiencer research study, we discovered that individuals were reported having experiences with tens of thousands of diverse looking beings. Just my friend Alberto Hernandez, one individual, has had, my goodness, over 100 different types of beings that he has had experiences with. Almost all of them were human looking beings. Okay. I mean, from an Asian man to a 7 foot tall man with a Greek tunic and long white beard to another type of Asian man in monk's robes. But then there's numerous other individuals that have had human looking beings, energy beings, humanoid types of beings. and almost an infinite number. One of our friends also that lives in Miami, another Cuban American, his name is Albert Rosales. He's published 16 books on humanoid encounters. And that book has almost 1,000 different types of humanoids that he's written in these books. And these are reports that come from all over the world. And they've come from numerous sources. So, then you could ask your question, are these, tens of thousands of different physically seen beings coming from tens of thousands of different planets, and usually these experiences are less than 30 seconds. Rarely does it last for more than a minute. And so are they coming from all these planets interacting with humans for less than 30 seconds? Or is this a non-physical phenomenon? It's a little bit more complicated. The Sasquatch encounters, the longest one that I've encountered was one that was told to me by a retired medical doctor, Dr. Melinda Greer. Her chapter of her experiences is in volume 3 of actually volume 1 in our book. She's like the lead experiencer chapter, and she's had everything and the kitchen sink of experiences. And she's had 3 Sasquatch experiences. One of them was an experience that lasted more than 4 hours, where this Sasquatch was behind her the whole time, and she physically saw it. It was right on top of her. So that was probably the most lengthy type of experience with a physical non-human intelligence that I have ever read or listened to someone's story. So yes, Sasquatch is very, very real. But again, getting back to my earlier point, Dr. Melinda Greer has seen 12 UFOs. She's had 2 near-death experiences. One at the age of 7 that really opened up all of these experiences. She's had literally thousands of out-of-body experiences. After her second near-death experience, she began to see deceased people at the hospital that she works with. And before you come at me with NDE people seeing dead people, it's a very common phenomenon for NDE experiencers. One other individual is another retired medical doctor, Dr. Yvonne Kaysen, and she's had several NDEs. And she describes in several of her books of after her NDEs till to this day, she sees a lot of dead people, deceased people. So it's almost all the NDE researchers know about this relationship of having an NDE and then seeing dead people. The problem is it's never been studied statistically. We don't have, what are the numbers, the percentages of people that have had NDEs that later on see dead people. You could only get that anecdotally if you interview these people or if you listen to their testimonies on YouTube or in their books. But definitely every NDE researcher, including one of our co-editors of our book, A Greater Reality, Dr. Jeffrey Long, acknowledged it. Yes, it's obvious. Every NDE researcher knows that, of the relationship between having an NDE and then later on seeing ghosts or deceased people. But not only that, the entire paranormal spectrum. After you have an NDE, you began to have various types of paranormal experiences. And that's what we documented also in our book, UFOs. So yet that's another commonality of why all of this phenomenon needs to be studied as a whole integrated phenomenon. And as I said earlier, the problem we have is we just don't have the data, Jeffrey.
We've got a question here from, it's a follow-up question, I guess, from Jive Cat, the Magnificent, who asks, do you have any thoughts on the quote, anomaloons? I believe you are familiar with Jeta and his recording.
Yes.
Many strange balloons which seem to appear on command.
Jeta lived less than a mile away from me when I lived in Miami, and he lived in Miami. And now he doesn't live in Miami anymore. But I was a witness to this, where he goes, "Okay, Ray, let me summon them." Like doing a CE5 and calling a UFO. And then what would appear to Jada was not a quote unquote typical light configuration like you would see in a UFO sighting. It would be balloons. And my goodness, it was like 4 of these experiences I was a personal witness to. And so what I let me tell you a little story here. and you might get a laugh out of this, Jeffrey. We both know John Alexander, right? Okay. John is one of these individuals that, just like both of us, understands that consciousness is fundamental and that all of the paranormal is somehow interrelated, right? So he came and visited me one day. He had given me a call, say, Ray, I'm in South Florida. Do you have any time to, to meet with me? I said, sure, and we made an arrangement. And there he met my wife, and my wife told her all about our experiences. So in a certain way, it was validating my experiences because he is my wife, telling him the same thing. But one thing is, once he was about to leave, and he came with his son, I believe, yeah, it was his son, who was a retired sheriff or in Broward County, I think it was. And so as they were leaving, okay, from the direction of Jada's house, there was a bright silver balloon. It was like less than 100 feet. I mean, it was clear, clear as a doorbell. Went right on top of Dr. Alexander and just stood there, right? And so I knew what this was, okay? I knew what this was. And so John obviously didn't know, because he didn't know the story of Jada and my full detailed explanation. And so I pointed up, I said, look up, John, look up. And he looked up, he goes, it's just a balloon, But in my mind, I knew what this was, okay? Because it just hovered and stayed right there, right? And so after John looked down and began, saying goodbye and walking to the car, then it took off, So yes, I know Jada very well. I know the phenomena very, very well. I've been a witness to numerous of these events, and joint friend John Alexander was an inadvertent witness to it as well. Except I didn't care to detail that explanation because it would have been too lengthy, and he was ready to go home.
Very interesting.
Yes, very interesting.
Here's a question from a viewer whose YouTube name is the Apollo Dionysus Dichotomy. I think some of these names are very...
I need to change my name here.
The question is, what aspect of human personality, if any, do you believe survives death?
Well, for that response, I think you need to turn to the NDE literature. And I've been fortunate enough I've had a relationship with Kenneth Ring, one of the pioneers of NDE research. And it was through Dr. Ring that I got to meet Dr. Michael Grosso, who he quoted extensively in his book, The Omega Project. And it was about the same topics, the mind of God. Dr. Grosso called it mind at large, okay? And but it's the same theme, same topic. Larry Dossey also used very similar terminology. And also Dr. Jeffrey Long, one of the major NDE researchers, is one of our co-editors, and I'm a very good friend of his as well. And they subsequently introduced me to Raymond Moody, Bruce Grayson. Again, these are the cream of the crop, the pioneers of NDE research. And also I've done a lot of interviews of individuals one-on-one where I always had a different spin to the NDE phenomenon that maybe these individuals did not ask, did not pursue. For example, that we talked about earlier, about after having an NDE, having subsequent paranormal experiences. A lot of these researchers never really followed up on this, where you could have had several books just on that topic, okay? So what I learned from a lot of NDE experiencers is that not for the majority of them, but for a minority of them, okay? Like, for example, Dr. Melinda Greer is an example. She discussed that when she was in this NDE realm, some people call it heaven, I called it the mind of the mind at large, or the mind of God. What they mention is that her consciousness, that her individuated consciousness of her life experiences, as Dr. Melinda Greer, was uploaded to like a central database, the Akashic records, whatever, to the mind of God, whatever name you want to give it, okay? It was uploaded. And what remained was just an individuated unit of consciousness without the memories of Dr. Melinda Greer, Okay. And so, and all of these individuals describe interacting with other like intelligences that didn't have their life experiences. You know, they weren't Dr. Melinda Greer, they weren't Jeffrey Mishloff, they weren't Ray Hernandez. Okay. They're just individuated units of consciousness where telepathic communication was instantaneous and everyone knew what each other's thoughts were. And maybe that's the state of mind, the state of individuated units of consciousness before we reincarnate, if we have to reincarnate, okay, where that memory is wiped out. And then a lot of these individuals describe as once they were told that they got to return, or they understood that they were in a transition back to this earthly realm, it was then a cycle of getting these memories back. Like those memories were gone. And it was slowly getting them back. Like the information fields that you see, the zeros and ones, were slowly coming back to that person. And many of these individuals described floating above their body, like Dr. Melinda Greer, not knowing that that was them, not knowing that that was their body, because that process of getting these memories back, of associating with that body, was not complete yet. And then little by little, you get these memories of who you were before. You know, what was your personality, your life, your history, all your memories. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, that's me underneath. And that's usually after that is then your consciousness goes back into your body. So that's a concept, Jeffrey, that really the NDE field has not pursued, okay, as much as I would like to pursue it. I wish, if once I retire, that I could get these individuals that have had these experiences, and there are quite a few, there's tons of them. All you have to do is to go to YouTube and listen to NDE self-testimonies, and you'll easily get at least 50 people that describe what I just told you, okay? So if we can get these people to do in-depth interviews and ask them these the questions to get more data, more information about what that process is like. So I hope I've answered your question, is that I personally believe that the NDE phenomenon, if it gets extended to these major contact experiencers, is gone. It's uploaded. It's uploaded to the mind of God. And I personally hypothesize that this is a process where it prepares you for reincarnation. You have to cleanse those memories of your past life in order to reincarnate again. So that's just my personal hypotheses, but we're just in the infant stages of trying to understand the complexities behind this process.
Okay, and I'm getting, it looks like a follow-up question then from the Apollo-Dionysus dichotomy, who's asking you, would that mean that mediums are not talking to the dead, but they are accessing a database?
That's my hypothesis, that you're accessing a database. You're not actually talking to, you know, that deceased person, because that deceased person no longer exists. It might have been reincarnated into a new body, but that database remains, because if we're talking about the mind of God, if we're talking about the creator of all these individuated units of consciousness, you know, for an eternity. And then we're not talking about humans, we're talking about possibly other forms of intelligences, not only in this reality, but who knows how many other realities that are out there. I think that we're communicating with the data remnants of who that person was.
Okay, I'll add briefly that I think there are some exceptions to that general trend that you're describing. You know, there are probably many additional possibilities.
Sure. There's numerous permutations to that, I think. But again, Jeffrey, as you know, we're just in the infant stages of these things. You know, but that's just my hypotheses now, where I stand.
Here's a question from Wes, who wants to know, what are your thoughts on psychedelic contact experiences?
Well, I coined them as part of the contact modalities. You have numerous psychedelic academic research scholars that have published articles comparing psilocybin and DMT with near-death experiences. We have one of these articles in our book by Dr. Roland Griffiths, a professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And he's been doing psychedelic research for more than 20 years. They have an actual institute there of psychedelic studies. And now there are many universities around the world that have a unit of psychedelic studies within their universities. And there was another individual, I forgot his name, but from the University of London, they have an institute for psychedelic studies there. And he also recently wrote an article comparing DMT and psilocybin to near-death experiences. So these researchers understand that connection. But what we need to do now is to flush out the details to get more data, because we have initial hypotheses on a lot of these things. And my hypothesis is that all of these paranormal contact experiences, what I call the contact modalities, that they're all interrelated under the umbrella of consciousness. And again, that's just a very broad generic term here. But with the data that we did of the UFO contact experiencers, we actually had data. We had tons of data that demonstrated the validity of that hypothesis, at least with the UFO contact experiencer. So we need to do that with all of the different contact modalities, and then to compare and contrast them, which no one really has ever done before. I don't, as a massive scale, that's something that I want to do. Maybe when I'm 80 years old, but to form a separate academic research organization to do this comparative work, which is necessary to have a better handle of these topics.
Well, you're such a pioneer, Ray, and you're really pushing hard on the very areas that most people don't want to address, the really high strangeness phenomenon. So I'm tempted to ask, I've never asked you, how old are you?
Oh, I'm 66 years old. I've just I've gotten my Medicaid card, so I plan to retire in about a year at the end of next year, and hopefully I'll have some time to do these things, because right now I'm a full-time estate tax attorney. I deal with these very, very high-powered attorneys who are CPAs and they have masters in taxation, and they represent the millionaires and the billionaires, because that's the work that I do. I audit estate tax returns. And you have to be a multimillionaire to be audited by an estate tax return. So it really is time consuming, it's very complicated, and I really don't have a lot of free time. So all of this work that I'm doing is at a sacrifice to my family, but it's important work that needs to be done because no one else is doing it. I mean, you're doing it in terms of interviews, okay? But in terms of pushing the envelope, in terms of the contact modalities and its relationship to consciousness, there's a lot of people that mention these concepts, but no one is striking it directly like I'm trying to do it.
Well, my philosophy is let 1,000 flowers bloom, and I hope some of our viewers take that to heart, because we could use an army of people like yourself. Here's a wonderful question from Pauline Heinbrook, who asks you to please address Christ consciousness.
Oh boy, that's a biggie there. I personally believe that that religion is not involved here, a specific religion. But if you listen to the testimonies of near-death experiencers, if you listen to the research that has been done, all of the major researchers will mention that there is a universal intelligence behind the phenomenon. Dr. Jeffrey Long, in his last book, mentioned the word God, okay? But that many of these individuals that have a life review have an encounter, an experience with a perceived God. The issue is that we are so indoctrinated with religion that we always associate that term God with a specific religion. Now, to add even more complexities to this, when people have near-death experiences, what I was told by many of these NDE researchers, the people, who interviewed and studied thousands of these cases, is that the vast majority of the quote unquote physical being that they're interacting with, that they associate as God, are energy beings. But many, many, many of them, hundreds of these cases, they see what they perceive to be Jesus Christ. Okay. For example, I also had via a DMT experience. I had a man with a short beard that I perceived to be Jesus Christ sat down in front of me in a lotus position. Okay, and it's a very detailed story. Okay, but what I think is happening is that a lot of people, Alberto, for example, is a classic case. In his earthly experiences, he saw the Sacred Heart of Christ, that the Catholics reveal, as an orb when he was a young boy that came into his body like an orb. And he started shaking and quivering, but he wasn't Catholic. His family was not Catholic. He later had two experiences with a physical being that he associated as Jesus Christ. Okay. So he's also seen a woman that looked like the Virgin Mary. I mean, dressed as a monk's garment, that he, immediately he thought it was the Virgin Mary, but it didn't look anywhere near like what you would perceive of a Virgin Mary. It had a short, crooked nose, and anyway. But I think is what we are and many people that have had paranormal experiences have had encounters with a perceived being that they associated as Christ. Okay, and so what I think is happening is that this universal mind of God is tailoring your experiences to you. Okay, so you can be able to adapt to accept the experience. For some people that might be Buddhist, you might see Buddhist symbols, Buddhist traditions, Muslim traditions, Muslim symbols. Okay, and because this is a flexible phenomenon. Okay, all of these experiences, as you probably know, Jeffrey, none of them are the same. Even if you have an NDE experience, okay, none of them are the same. They might have the commonalities of an NDE experience, okay, but they're all tailored to the individual, okay? Same thing with the UFO contact phenomenon. We did not see two of these UFO contact phenomenons that were exactly the same. They were all different, okay? Just like I mentioned earlier, the thousands of beings that people were interacting with, okay? Thousands of different types of beings, but yet it followed a certain pattern, telepathic communication within your native language. It might have shown you things of the future. It might have explained certain spiritual aspects to you, et cetera, et cetera. So these are commonalities of the phenomenon, but it's specifically tailored to you. So what I personally think, and again, this is hypothesis because we don't have the data to back it up, is that the mind of God is tailoring these experiences via the contact modalities specifically for you for a reason. And I think the overall reason behind all of this, behind all of these contact modalities, is spiritual awakening. Okay, for you to wake up to understand that you are an eternal spiritual being, because that's the bottom thread that interlies all of the contact modalities, is that many years after you've had a chance to decipher your experiences, analyze to process your experiences, you change profoundly. And that's what Kenneth Ring found in his book, The Omega Project. That's what we found in our book on UFO contact experiencers. And the most important one out of them all was spirituality. You had people that were atheists, like in my case. Now you're deeply spiritual. People that were religious, and now you still go to church. You still have that religious aspect of it, but you become deeply spiritual. So I believe that the underlying reason for all of these experiences is to awaken us to spirituality, and that we are eternal spiritual beings.
Wonderful answer. This is, well, I mentioned we've just passed the bottom of the hour, and I want our viewers to know we're going to go for another 55 minutes. Now, here's a question from Bonnie Greatorex, who asks or points out that supposedly people who have the Rh negative blood types get abducted more often. And I guess she's asking if you have any thoughts about it. Is that true, or do you have any other thoughts about it?
False, false, false. That's just a random rumor started in the internet, like all these other conspiracy theories. We actually asked that RH question, okay? And we compared it to abductions. We even compared it to how negative was your perception of the abduction phenomenon. And what we discovered was that the statistical distribution of Rh negative falls exactly to the population of the US. It was even the same within 1 percentage point of the US population. Why? Because we had a large sample. We had 4,300 people, okay? So I forgot what the exact statistic was. Let's say, for example, 13%. It was like maybe 13.5, okay? A small deviation from it. So, and then we even compare it to the abductee, people that mentioned that they had an abduction. And again, the same thing. So there's no correlation. This is another BS rumor started on the internet that just took off.
Very good. Here's a question from Kevin Briggs, who says, "Hi, Ray. I am aware of your previous contact. My question is, are you still having contact with our ET star families? If so, what are the modalities of contact they are using?"
Hi, Kevin. Kevin is a very good friend, a very big supporter, and he has a very large group down there in the Orlando area that are supporters of my work, and I'm a supporter of his work and his group. So, Kevin, no, my major contact experiences ended in about 2014, about 2 years after these experiences. They still continued for an additional 2 years, but not to the state it was before. It was like every week I would have a major experience. Now, what I still get is that I still perceive someone that I meet that they have had a contact experience. I don't know what it is, whether it's a near-death experience, an out-of-body experience, they've seen ghosts or spirits, but a very high percentage of people that I initiate these communications with, they turn out to be an experiencer of the contact modalities, a major experiencer of the contact modalities. And I think Jeffrey and I were having this conversation right before we went on the air. So let me give you an illustration of what I currently have, and that's pretty much what remains. Let me tell you the last one, okay? I ask people about NDEs maybe once every 3 months, like, and every time I hit the lotto, okay? The last one occurred 2 days ago, where I went to a store to pick up an order. It was waffles for my daughter, okay? And then all of a sudden, I felt this young lady across from me. As you sense it, you know, that energy. And so I started off, you know, asking her questions about what she's studying, is she going to school, and she comes back that she wants to be in the medical field, that she's doing medical stenography. I don't know the formal name of that. And then eventually I got around to asking her that question: have you ever heard of the term near-death experience? Okay, so she looks at me like real puzzled, and she goes, yes. She goes, why did you ask me that? I said, well, I sense something about you, right? And then she goes, my mother had a near-death experience, and my mother has only told me and no one else, and told me a little bit about her mother. And I said, did your mother go out of her body and see her body underneath you? She goes, yes. You know, how did you know that? and so I gave her my card. You know, I told her, give me a call and send me an email, we'll communicate. Now, a couple of months before, there was like 3 months before, the one previous to this, I was getting some blood work, and there were 2 phlebotomists. The first one was a younger woman. She was in her, I would say, mid-30s. The other one was an older woman, okay? I would say she was maybe in her late 60s, early 70s. And so anyway, with the young woman, I felt it very strongly, okay? And so I just blurted it out. I didn't even introduce a conversation. I just blurted out. I said, you work in the medical field, okay? Yes, yes. Have you ever heard of the term near-death experiences? And she was like stunned, okay? And she stopped and she looked, her eyes popped out and she looked at me and she said, how did you know I had one? How did you know I had one? And so she eventually tells me about her NDE, and the details. And so after she finished telling me her story, I said, well, a lot of near-death experiencers see dead people, ghosts and spirits after their NDE experience. And again, she was totally stunned and her mouth was like wide open. She goes, how do you know that? How do you know that? I began to see a whole lot of dead people, especially in this hospital, and so then the older lady who was listening in, she said, my husband had a near-death experience and he told me about it. And so I asked both of them, I said, you work together. Have you ever talked about this to yourselves? No. Have you talked about it to anyone else? And they both said, only their spouses, and then the older lady said, after my mother died, I saw my mother in my living room in physical form. So the energy in that room is like, I sensed it. Okay. So and then before that was when I was getting a haircut. Okay. With these two barbers. There was actually 3 barbers, but 2 of them had major experiences. Okay. Again, I don't know how to explain the reasoning behind it, but that is the only experience that lingers on from years ago when these experiences started. When it started, it was like you could see like a light ray coming from that person. It's like, I know it, like 110%. Now it's like you get a feeling, you got a sense. So Kevin, that's the only thing that remains from back then. I hope I've answered your question.
I think that was an excellent answer, Ray. Lace Murray, I hope I'm pronouncing that, Lace or Lice, L-A-I-S, Murray. Her question is, or his, would you have some comment on, quote, missing time versus frozen time during a UAP interaction?
Okay, I don't know the difference between missing time and a frozen time. The first time I was informed about what is missing time was after our 3rd major experience in May of 2012. This was 6 months after that initial experience in my living room. I called MUFON because by then I knew that this was UFO related because my wife was going outside to pray and these UFOs would appear. Very large, UAPs, which I call consciousness aerial phenomenon, CAP. Why? Because they're consciousness-based experiences. So I rephrased it and recoined it, CAPs, okay? And so this lady came out here from the MUFON organization. That's an organization that studies UFO contact experiences. She was a retired school teacher, and her husband came as well. Her husband was retired from the Hurricane Center in Miami. So he's a pure scientist. And she was the one that told me. I told her about my wife disappeared right in front of me. And she reappeared an hour later. And my wife, when I initially spoke with her, she had no idea that she was gone for an hour. And then when this woman, the retired school teacher, interviewed her as well, she told her, I didn't go anywhere. I was there the whole time, And so she told me, Ray, what happened to your wife? And she also explained it to my wife, with my wife in front of me, is she had what is called missing time. Okay. Now, missing time is, as I illustrated before, this was in my living room. We didn't see a UFO. Okay. I interacted with an energy being. My wife interacted with this perceived physical object in our living room. Might have been a tiny UFO, that had shrunk. Okay, who knows? But these experiences are spoken about, associated with UFO contact experiences, but they also occur in other types of paranormal experiences. And just for the audience members, that is when, for example, Dr. Melinda Greer, who I mentioned before, the retired medical doctor, who I consider one of the major experiencers of the contact modalities. She's had several of these experiences. One time was when she was a resident, and she had another resident medical doctor next to her. And all of a sudden, it was like 2 hours later, it was like dusk, and they were like 20 miles away from where they were driving. And so she knew that it was missing time because she has had it before. So not only in her case was it missing time, but it was also relocation to another place. Again, we really don't understand the dynamics of this phenomenon. All that's been explained and discussed is under this rubric of an abduction. I think it's much more complicated than that.
Well, I could add a word quickly about frozen time. I think that would be similar to the reports of Elizabeth Crone, my friend who's written the book Changed in a Flash. She was struck by lightning, had a near-death experience, but it was short. It lasted about 2 minutes. However, in her experience, it took 2 weeks.
Yes, I could attest to that. When I was taken out of my body while I was driving my car, I was in the middle of a traffic jam. I was ready to go to work in the morning. And I was listening to this interview of this man doing a documentary on his liposuction. Okay, so I was perceived out of my body for like 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. It's difficult to gauge time if your consciousness is outside your body, right? But when I was brought back, like no time had elapsed, because that person's interview on public radio station did not skip a beat. There was not 1 second that had elapsed. So it's like you're taken outside of the space-time and brought back in to your original space-time. So maybe that's what you might be referring to in terms of frozen time.
Yeah, I think
okay.
that would be the distinction I would see. So here's a very interesting question from Andrei Slavash Krasowski, who asks, when you consider contact modalities, do you include also phenomena of apparent contact with different parts of one's own person? I think that's what he means, like in some magical practices or in psychiatric issues like hallucinations, where, in other words, it's parts of one's own subconscious that get projected.
Well, I personally think it's all interrelated, and I'm sure you do as well, Jeffrey. What the problem is that we just don't understand the phenomena, that we really have not done any sophisticated academic research in the complexities of this phenomenon that you spoke about, because what we have in the field of psychiatry and psychology is, for example, I was having all these weird, crazy experiences, right? My wife was like, you need to go to the psychiatrist, you need to go to the psychiatrist, even though she was having all these precognitive events. She detected a tumor on my back. Okay, she just knew it was there. She didn't want to go to this conference that we were going to go to because the engine's going to explode eventually. Like a few days before the conference, I brought it to the mechanic, and the mechanic said, thank God you didn't take that long trip, because the car would have exploded. So she was having these very powerful precognitive, is that the term? I guess experiences, right? And these precognition events. And and so, I believe that all of these phenomena involving the psyche, your internal psyche, this is so profound, so complex. I mean, Jung, Carl Jung, began to explore some of these complications associated with that. And that's pretty much the closest that we have of someone exploring these things in detail. Okay, but even then, that's just the infant stages of this. But I guess the response to your question is yes, this is all interrelated. We just don't understand the complexities of it.
Excellent answer, in my opinion. And yes, I do agree. Here, this question was also translated from Spanish by a YouTuber named Kinshi. And that's his or her YouTube name, who asks, what do you think of MUFON? Is it convenient to share with them? And Kinshi adds, I am an experiencer.
Okay, I'm assuming she means MUFON, right?
Yeah.
The UFO organization. Well, I believe that anyone that's had these experiences needs to reach out and communicate with other experiencers, not report it to MUFON, because they provide zero support. Their focus is not on the experiencer. Their focus is on collecting data. And MUFON as an organization has sold their data to government intelligence agencies. There's many wonderful people involved with MUFON, okay? But for many, many years, the hierarchy of the MUFON organization was not geared towards the experiencer, was not geared towards the paranormal aspects of the phenomenon. Those types of cases were dismissed for many, many, many years. But yet I know that MUFON has some wonderful people. Many of them were trained in psychology themselves, that are major experiencers, that are there to help and support people. So the only thing I could say is just, beware, do not reveal to the organization MUFON all of your the details of your experiences, unless you understand that it might be moved up the hierarchy to other organizations and institutions. If anyone out there needs someone to talk to, I have a long list of individuals that are trained in the mental health field, that are also experiencers, that has what they've been doing for many, many, many years. And they could support you, they could help you, they could guide you, they provide you to other experiencers as well. So again, send me an email at info@agreaterreality.com, and I will help you.
Wonderful information. info@agreaterreality.com. Rich Sheck asks, did Edgar Mitchell ever share with you his experiences with UFOs or ETs?
He never had any. He never had any. What he did have is a great interest in consciousness research and in the paranormal. Okay. He did mention that when he was returning back from the moon, he had what is now called a samadhi experience. And that what was told to him what he had, which is a very common phenomenon of individuals that have had near-death experiences, astral travel experiences, and even UFO contact experiences. And that is receiving information that we are all one, that we're not separate, okay? That everything is interrelated. And that's a phenomenon that people have received via DMT, psilocybin, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very common experience to have. Edgar had that. All of a sudden, it's like he had this information that we're all interrelated. We're all interconnected. There's no separateness. And it was so powerful that after that experience, Edgar was like, what the hell just happened to me? It came out of the blue. And so eventually he formed the following year, after he came back from the moon, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is now the leading academic research institute on ESP. And I also dare to say consciousness with Dr. Dean Radin and so many others affiliated with that organization. And what a lot of people don't know about, you certainly do know about it, Jeffrey, is that Edgar, 1974, published a book titled Psychic Explorations, okay? And that book was an edited book, and it had many of the leading minds that were focusing on parapsychology. This is in the early 70s. Excuse me. And Edgar specifically omitted two of the contact modalities. One was near-death experiences. And what it was that that really was not a household name at that time. unless you studied, ancient Greek philosophy, you really didn't know about the NDE connection. A year later, Raymond Moody published in 1975, Life After Life. And that's when the NDE explosion occurred. Also, Edgar, in that book, Psychic Explorations in 1974, did mention UFOs. He had about a page and a half discussing UFOs. And what he mentioned was that I know that it's a very real phenomenon, but there's zero academic statistical research on the phenomenon. And so that's why on purpose, we didn't include it in our book. And Edgar was a dear friend of his. I was at his home numerous times, at least 20 times, between May 2013 and his passing, which was February of 2016, because he was one of the co-founders of our organization, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation. And we had numerous telephone calls as well, but I prefer to do things one-on-one with Edgar, since he only lived 90 minutes away. So he told me that many of the astronauts, US astronauts, and the cosmonauts, the Russian cosmonauts, had paranormal experiences in space. And he described some of them. And he also discussed to me that they don't talk about these things publicly. But in terms of the UFO aspect of it, he never mentioned anything that was UFO related. What you do find in the internet is, what I say again, is a lot of these conspiracy theories with no data, no research, nothing of substance, no interviews of Edgar Mitchell to back it up that he had an experience in space. So what I would say is, stop looking at those YouTube videos on the internet of Edgar Mitchell thinking, and a narrator saying that he saw UFOs, and buy his book, Psychic Exploration, if you really want a better understanding of who Dr. Edgar Mitchell was.
Thank you for that answer. Here's a question from Andy Chuang, who asks about the Mandela effect. He wants to know what the cause of the Mandela effect is, and if you have any other opinions about it.
Jeffrey, do you know what that is? Because I have no, I've heard that term, but I don't know what it is.
Well, the Mandela effect is when people have memories about something and then they learn that their memory is wrong. For example, a number of people believed that Nelson Mandela had died and that his funeral had been broadcast on TV. Then they later learned, no, he's still alive. That's how the name came into being. But there are many examples of people who report they had such and such an experience. They're sure it happened, that they experienced it, but then they discover, no, it didn't actually happen.
Yes, I did hear about this. I just forgot the association with the term and the phenomenon. I've also have spoken with many people that have described this as well. So I know it's a real, phenomenon. Again, in terms of explanations for this, no one really has a, definitive, concrete explanation for these things. The only thing we could do at this point is just document it. And again, getting back to associating these experiences like the NDE phenomenon, where your memories are uploaded and your consciousness is uploaded, and that we do live in information, based phenomenon, and so the information might be distorted, at times. People might explain it in terms of, information from a matrix, it might be a little blip. People have talked about that they've looked at the coding in string theory, and that there are error corrections, in the coding. A couple of professors of theoretical physics have discussed this. Who knows, but it's a phenomenon that we just don't understand.
Okay. We certainly don't understand that one. We're getting a number of comments from viewers who are congratulating you on all the work that you're doing and thanking you for it. Here's a question from Pauline Heinbrook, once again, who asks, why do some people get experiences and others don't?
Boy, that's the $1,000 question. I wish I had an answer to that. The only thing that I could, come up with is that certain individuals have been tagged with certain responsibilities. Just like in your life, when NDE, again, I revert so much of what I'm saying to NDEs, because the NDE phenomenon, I think, has such a wealth of information that really has not been tapped into as fully as it should be tapped into. One is that when people have a life review and then they're told you need to go back, okay? Nobody wants to go back. Everybody wants to stay. And then they're shown visions of their future and the consequences, okay? What will happen if you're not there, okay? So it's these consequences of your impact of you going back and living your life. Another people are shown in a life review the impacts of their decisions, okay? They said, look, we showed you all the negative stuff, okay? And you were frightened to death of the negative things that you've done, or the poor decisions, I should say, okay? But then they're shown the good decisions, the good that they have done. And they're shown how you telling this person a certain thing impacted the rest of their lives. They totally changed, okay? They're seeing it, they're feeling it, okay? Of this connection between something that you did to someone in the future of what they're going to do. So I think that our lives are already pre-programmed, that we have the ability to ad lib. You know, we do have free will, okay? But there's certain parameters, certain structures where we can do that free will, like certain things already structured out. Like Ray Hernandez was already pre-planned to do the work that I'm doing, okay? And then there's certain permutations of consequences of all these things. And I think, you know, my work and your work, Jeffrey, and so many others, okay? I think that we're here at a crucial time, because humanity has reached a point of self-destruction, okay? Numerous reasons, you know, ecological self-destruction, nuclear self-destruction, the economic inequalities around the world, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're heading in that direction of self-extinction, okay? And the reason why I think 3 out of the 4 major contact modalities began to be expanded around the world, okay, within 5 years of each other. For example, NDE started in 75, okay? Now you go all the way around the world, everybody knows about NDEs, okay? Out-of-body experience started in 1972 with Robert Monroe's book, Higher Journeys, okay? Now, not as common as NDEs, but in numerous parts around the world, people know what an out-of-body experience is. The UFO contact phenomenon, I argue, started when Star Trek got syndicated. We're talking about universal knowledge around the world now. And so in every major language, people were watching Star Trek in 1970 because it got syndicated to the TV stations, okay? Now you go by and everyone knows what UFOs are. Everyone knows what aliens are, you know, beings from other planets, other dimensions, et cetera, et cetera. And then let alone the hundreds of movies that have been made on these topics. So then you go back and you ask the question, why did 3 out of the 4 major contact modalities, the exception being ghosts and spirits, which have been talked about since the dawn of mankind, why were they introduced to humanity before the internet? That's a very important point. Before the internet, okay? Within 5 years of each other. Is that a coincidence? There are no coincidences in life, okay? And you spoke with many people that have researched the topic of coincidences. One is Dr. Brightman, I think he is. He's a professor at the University of Missouri Medical School, is a PhD psychiatrist who has specialized studying in coincidences. And many other people have studied this at an academic level. So what I believe is that this is happening now at this time is because we need to awaken humanity to change our ways. We need to become more loving, okay, to each other, okay, more spiritual. And that's why it's happening right now. And hopefully we can avoid self-extinction.
Very good. Here is a question from Emin Pudama. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, who asks, how can we tell information from disinformation in this area?
Oh, goodness, that's another $1,000 question. I take the position because I get these types of questions all the time. Is this real? Is that not real? I take the position that the majority of what's on the internet is misinformation and disinformation. Okay, that's where I start off from. Um, and like, for example, just the whole topic of ufology. Okay, what is circulating on the internet pretty much has nothing to do with the data that we receive from these 4,300 UFO contact experiences. If you go to the internet, you would think it would be just little grays that are doing these hybrid experiments on us, creating this hybridization program, all these evil reptilians, that the deceased Queen of England was a reptilian and Barack Obama was a reptilian. And, that's the type of nonsense that is circulating on the internet, but yet that is so predominant in these Facebook sites that you see the majority of these postings on these Facebook sites is those types of postings. So it's very difficult for individuals to get any type of credible information. And then compounding that, Jeffrey, is our book, as you know, is really the only game in town. No one has ever done a comprehensive academic statistical research study of the UFO contact phenomenon. But yet the whole field of parapsychology and the whole field of ufology has totally ignored this book. Okay. You think Ray Hernandez would be invited to all these major UFO conferences around the world? No, the whole field of parapsychology. Do you think that, the field of parapsychology has associated the work that we did with Beyond UFOs with the field of parapsychology? I clearly see that relationship, and I know that you do as well. Okay, but yet, these fields are so demarcated by their structural boxes, like Dr. Alexander talks about. All these separate fields are being put in their little boxes. They're silos. He calls them silos. Okay, of intellectual curiosity, to the point where you go to an NDE conference, which I did. I went to the National Near-Death Experience Research Conference in Orlando, and I begin to interact with some of these leaders of that organization. And most of them had an NDE. But then they're like, what does UFOs have to do with NDEs? What does out-of-body experiences have to do with NDEs? What does the paranormal have to do with NDEs? NDEs are NDEs. That's it. There's no relationship. And so that is a mindset that is in all of the other contact modality fields. And so we still have a long way to go before we get into some of the complexities of the interrelationships between consciousness and the contact modalities.
Okay, I want our viewers to know I have 8 minutes after the top of the hour. We're going to continue for another 22 minutes till we reach the bottom of the hour. We've got many questions coming in from our viewers, and here's one from Emily AM, who asks, or Emily Am, are dreams a valid contact modality? Could someone communing with space beings in a dream be considered a genuine contact experience?
I would argue definitively yes. Okay. We actually have an article in our book associated with the academic research of lucid dreams. I consider lucid dreams to be a valid contact modality. I believe it was your dear friend, was it Stanley Krippner, was the first one that began researching the complexities of dreams and lucid dreams.
Dream telepathy, yes.
Dream telepathy. So I've also spoken to many individuals that have had these dreams that were not segmented, that were continuous, and they lasted seemingly for hours as a continuous experience. And that's not associated with a common, regular dream. Okay, this is something a little bit more complex. People, had interactions with certain types of intelligences. Let's call them for the time being physical beings, for example. Okay, and then maybe a few months later, they'll have one of these extended communications with this intelligence. Okay, and where all this teaching came about. All this information came about. And so, did this person make this up? Especially, an hour-long session communicating with this intelligence in a dreamlike format. Also, another thing that I want to raise is the out-of-body experience. Many people have had out-of-body experiences while they are sleeping. Okay, and these are pure conscious-based phenomena where you're wide awake, like you and I are talking right now. Okay, that occurs while you're sleeping. Okay, so there's that link between lucid dreams and the out-of-body phenomenon when your consciousness is out of your body. So again, we're just in the infant stages of trying to understand the complexities of these relationships, because there's numerous relationships here. The only thing we could do at this point is to say, yes, there is a relationship. Yes, they're somehow interrelated, and we need to do more research on it. But as you know, Jeffrey, research takes time and money and minds. The capacity of these academics who knew how to do these statistical research studies to be engaged, and many of these people that are in tenure track positions, or even after they receive tenure, they don't want to be ridiculed for doing this type of work. So a lot of them stay quiet for most of their lives. It's only, for example, the Free Organization and the CCRI organization. Most of these people that are published these articles, they're all retired. Okay, there are some that are still young that are active in the work, but the time really is not conducive at this point of humanity's lifetime to be able to go, like, to do cancer research, spend billions of dollars to try to understand the nature of our reality. But hopefully in the future, we'll get to that point if we survive as a species.
I have a question here from Glenn Zubris, who asks, what are your thoughts on human-alien hybrids?
No comment. No comment. We did ask several questions on this topic, and the responses that we received from our surveys, they what do you call statistical outliers? And what do you do with statistical outliers? You throw them away. There was a very small numbers of people that described those experiences. And then once we read the details of their experiences, and Dr. John Klimo as well, you realize that it didn't match up with all of the other types of experiences, because it was stuff that was circulating in the internet of being raped and violated, and people making all these comments like, oh, and some of the sex was good, that type of stuff, and so this topic was pretty much invented by one of the major researchers in the field, Dr. David Jacobs, who basically invented that genre. And I got to listen to some of his tapes, regression tapes, both before and during the regression. And for example, let me just give you an illustration, okay? And these are tapes that the ex-wife of Bud Hopkins had put on the internet, because she filmed these things, okay? And she basically wrote an article, which is going to appear in volume 3 of our book, about how these two individuals co-created the alien abduction phenomenon. Okay, so this is a woman that was part of that research, genre for many, many, many years. And so this guy, David Jacobs, invented this concept that they're creating all these hybrids, okay, and that humanity is walking around with hybrids, okay, and when you listen to these tapes, for example, just as an example, one tape had this woman who had supposedly an alien, reptilian abduction experience. He began to tell her about all these hybrids that came about from all these reptilian abductees that he had spoken with, like frightened this woman to death, right? So when he regressed her, naturally, what would her experiences going to come out? The same thing that he put into her mind, okay? And so a lot of people, also a lot of people don't know that is at most he only worked with 200 people. That's it, 200 people, because he was self-selected. Okay, he was selecting specific people that view these experiences as highly negative, and he was specifically focusing on these so-called people who had abduction experiences. Now, Dr. John Mack, initially when he wrote his first book on abductions, these were all clients that were referred to him by Bud Hopkins, okay? But after he published that book, okay, he then had, hundreds of people that that began to send him emails and letters, and their letters did not match anything about he wrote in the first book, because these were all people that had been prepped by Bud Hopkins, okay? Then later on, Dr. John Mack wrote a book titled Passport to the Cosmos, which viewed the phenomenon as completely different, night and day from what he first studied from his group that Bud Hopkins had sent him. And he later concluded that these are overwhelmingly positive experiences. They do have a negative component of it, but over time, people begin to perceive it as not a negative phenomenon, but as a transformative phenomenon, spiritually transformative phenomenon. And he even describes the ontological shock of the initial experience. And that's his quote, his term. And so what I recommend to a lot of people is that, what is circulating on the internet, okay, and in the field of ufology, a lot of it is misinformation and disinformation. The reason I could clearly say that is because unlike David Jacobs, who worked with 200 people, or Bud Hopkins, and they self-selected their clients, okay, we had 4,300 people from all over the world. And many of these people were in different languages. So they never read Bud Hopkins or David Jacobs. They were not even aware of those things. And what you get from not only the English language surveys, but in the surveys that we did in different languages, was a totally different phenomenon. So I sort of circulated around that question there, but I hope I got to the point.
Well, let's see. You started out by saying no comment, so.
I know. Yeah, because that's very, it bothers me a lot, Jeffrey, because that's one of the mindsets that people have within this field. And once you actually understand our data, if you read the book Beyond UFOs, you would understand that it's a very, very different phenomenon than what is circulating within the internet, these UFO conferences, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess it still leaves an open question. It sounds like you're saying that, we don't necessarily have to view this phenomenon as so scary and be frightened by it. On the one hand, on the other hand, some people are probably wondering, are alien hybrids real or not? Whether they're good or bad is a different question.
Again, there's no definitive answers to that, but I personally hypothesize that that this intelligence that we're interacting with, okay, and again, it gets back to the mind-body problem aspect of it, that these experiences are both psyche and very physical, okay, which at this point we just have more questions than answers to, okay. But in terms of the physicality of the phenomenon, yes, it's very, very physical, okay. People are seeing these physical beings, okay. They're seeing, thousands of different types of physical crafts, okay. So that physical aspect is very, very real. But what people just don't understand is, for example, let me use this as an illustration, okay. My dog was completely paralyzed, okay. She had a cerebral hemorrhage. We were going to be euthanizing her, okay. So within 1 hour, this intelligence got my dog and made her like a little puppy again, okay, completely healed. And our medical doctor, Dr. Joseph Burks, who is a retired emergency room physician, he wrote chapter 6 with Preston Dennett in our book Beyond UFOs on medical healings. Why? Because 50% of the people stated that either they or a member of their family had a miraculous medical healing. And then later on, Preston Dennett wrote a book titled 300 Cases of UFO Healings, okay? So it's very, very common. But in my particular case, this was a healing that took place within an hour. And Joseph Burke said, look, if someone that's had a cerebral hemorrhage, they need to fix this, they need to fix that, they need to fix this, they need to fix that. So this whole thing of taking out an ovum and putting a sperm in there and taking out sperm and stuff like that, Jacques Vallée always said, look, there's thousands of sperm banks, all over the world, tens of thousands of them. All they needed to do was to make a raid on these sperm banks, and they wouldn't need to go all around the world, collecting sperm from men and ovum from females, and if this intelligence is so sophisticated, I mean, you could Dolly the sheep was cloned from cells. You don't really need all of this. If this is the intelligence behind the phenomenon is so sophisticated as what we know it is. Okay, so just putting logic behind all of this, this whole aspect of hybrids, maybe there's something to that, but I don't think so.
Okay, here's a question from Red Ruby, who asks, what do you think of remote viewing? And do you think that remote viewing in the wrong hands could have a negative influence on the future?
Well, Dr. Alexander, John Alexander is would be the appropriate answer to understand this, because when he was in the Army, he interacted with individuals that were doing remote viewing, but for war strategies. Okay, for example, like that movie, The Man Who was it with the goats?
Men who stare at goats.
The Men Who Stare at Goats. The reason they were staring at that goat is to try to kill it. Okay, in modern analogies would be if someone who has these remote viewing skills would be looking at Vladimir Putin, and said, how can I give Putin a heart attack and kill him, So that was like the whole strategy behind that concept. And I think that that a lot of the remote viewers and Dr. Alexander spoke about that they've had certain results that indicated that that's a possibility. And so again, this is something that might be still going on in U.S. intelligence, because remote viewers were working for U.S. intelligence for many, many years. So you might know about that because you've interviewed almost all of them, Jeffrey.
Well, I'll move on. Actually, we've got a question here from your friend, Kevin Briggs, who says, hi, Ray, in your recent published book, The Mind of God, you have a chapter on apports with photos of the objects. What is your understanding of apports?
Oh my goodness. We discussed, my friend Alberto Fernandez I discussed apports under my discussions of Alberto. Again, just to highlight that these individuals are having many of the contact modalities, okay? And Alberto is just an example of it. But we asked that question, have you ever had, I forgot the exact phrasing of the question, but physical objects just appear right in front of you and you have no idea where they came from? And also, have you had objects that just disappeared on you, that that you put it in a certain place and no longer there, okay? But the more interesting question is an object that you never had in your house that just mysteriously appeared to you. And 25% of the UFO contact experiencers said yes. And then in the open-ended questions, we had a question about that. And it was, we received hundreds of responses on that question. So it's a very real phenomenon. And I think Stephen Broad, Dr. Stephen Broad, retired professor of philosophy from the University of Maryland, that I think you've interviewed him several times, Jeffrey. He's written several articles on apports. I don't think there's too many other individuals that have written academic articles on apports myself. At least I'm not familiar with it, but you have a better knowledge base of this as well. So it's very real phenomenon. In terms of the reasoning behind it, what it was for my friend Alberto was like this continuous education of Alberto, because this man was a major DEA federal agent. He put Manuel Noriega behind bars for trafficking cocaine, baby Doc Duvalier from Haiti. So this man was always struggling between his experiences and his work. I guess a parallel will be with my work. I'm an IRS tax attorney, and I denied this phenomenon for years. And it wasn't until I got constantly hit over the head by, I call it an ET 2x4, just as an analogy, okay? Where finally this experience occurred where I give up. This is real, So for Alberto, I think it was the same thing, is for him to understand that these experiences are very, very real. So if you get, I discussed this case before, a real quick one on Alberto. He has a collection of rings, for his ring finger, which matched exactly his ring finger, okay? So one day he told me, and he showed me, that there was a ring that didn't match. It was way, way bigger. So he put it on his shelf, not on his shelf, on his drawer. He has a whole huge shelf of all upwards, okay? And his wife was a witness to how these things would appear. The largest one was a sword with 22 notches on it. After this Chinese emperor appeared to him, that was his adopted father in the past life, and then boom, the sword appears the following day. And so he put it to the side, that ring that was too big, okay? Like a couple of weeks later, he goes and he sees that ring and he tries it on, said, maybe I'll bring it back to my shelf, right? A perfect match. So he said, Ray, unbelievable. They refitted my ring to make sure that it fits, So, I mean, there's an intelligence behind this phenomenon. We have no idea what's going on with this, but the phenomenon is real. That's the only thing we can do, is to document it, like Dr. Broad did, to research it, to study it, to write up about it. But in terms of answers behind it, we have no answers.
Well, clearly we need answers. Now we're almost at the bottom of the hour. So before we end our live stream program, I want to remind our viewers that New Thinking Aloud publishes a weekly newsletter, and it's free. And you can subscribe by going to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation. And New Thinking Aloud is all one word, newthinkingaloud.org. And it's ALLOWED, not ALOUD. So you can subscribe to our newsletter for free. You'll get advance notification of all the videos for the following week. We also publish other news items and artwork and sometimes poetry and things of interest. So I would encourage those of you who are not current subscribers to check out our newsletter. I think you'll find that it's very worthwhile. And also, Ray, if people want to reach out and contact you again, before we go, let's give them info@agreaterreality.com. That's the email address. And for example, if our viewers are experiencers themselves and want to talk to a therapist who is really knowledgeable and maybe also an experiencer, because these can be very troubling experiences emotionally for people at first. So we have just a couple of minutes left, Ray. There's one question I know people are curious about, and that is, what's the future of your work? What are you up to next?
Well, I have short-term objectives and a long-term objective. The short-term objective is to do a lot of what you're doing, which is to do these YouTube interviews, except I want to do group interviews. For example, getting two academics, or an academic and a medical doctor, together with two experiencers and discuss thematic topics. For example, discussing this topic of the mind of God. Let's explore that in depth. And telepathic communication, among all of the contact modalities, have that as a separate thematic topic, because I think one-on-one you can get a lot of information from individuals. The long-term objective that I would like is, as I said before, is to do a comprehensive academic research study of experiencers of the contact modalities, similar to what we did with Beyond UFOs, but comparing people who've had NDEs with UFO experiences, with out-of-body experiences, astral travel experiences, with remote viewers, et cetera, to see what are the commonalities, what are the differences. Because I have a hypothesis that the key to be able to understand what is consciousness is not so much from the philosophy of the mind genre, from the parapsychologists, but from the experiencers themselves. I alluded to many illustrations of near-death experiencers. That's such a wealth of knowledge in that phenomenon. And so that's what I would like to do, comparative academic research study.
Well, Ray, it has been a joy to be with you today. You are a wealth of information, and even more, I appreciate your passion for this subject and the energy that you give it. Thank you so much for being with me today and with our new Thinking Aloud audience. I hope that we have you back many times again in the future.
It was a pleasure and an honor, Jeffrey. Once again, thank you so very much.
And now I will